So hello, everyone. It's about noon. My name is Don Sosser. I'm the Faculty Associate Director for the Teaching and Learning Center. We have our professional development series on Wednesdays at noon. So we're here. Today we have a chat. Chats are really kind of cool because it's kind of free form. We can talk about whatever y'all want to talk about. I have a list of questions and things because I'm always going to make these worth my while. So I'm going to hear the things that I want to hear, but I want to make sure it's worth your whiles as well. This is our last event of the semester. I do want to put a couple of things out there as things to look for. Number one, the professional development series, you can earn a certificate. So if you're a GTA or an instructor at K-State, you can earn a certificate. Tucker or Ashley are going to drop that link into the chat. I can open up my chat. I'm going to drop that link into the chat where you can find that information for how you can apply to be a certificate winner. You can also apply to be a fellow for the TLC. It's you basically do the certificate plus a little bit more. The way that I typically think about the distinction between the certificate and the fellow is when you earn the certificate, you're focused on creating more excellence in your own teaching. But fellows, they do that and they try to extend the excellence of others teaching as well. So kind of that more pro-social aspect to the world around you. So we were looking forward to seeing these come in. The due date for these is coming up. I forget when the due date actually is. Tucker, Ashley, due date?
Friday, May 21st.
Friday, May 21st. So we got a couple of weeks. If you're like, oh, you know, I can completely do that, but it has to be May 24th, reach out. We'll see what we can do. But we'd love to see those applications getting in. The other announcement I'll put out is that in the near-ish future, we're going to have kind of an end of the semester, end of the series for the year kind of survey that we'll send out to everybody. We want to collect some data kind of on what is that the series itself did overall. We get a lot of surveys after each individual event, but we kind of want a holistic one looking at the series. So when we send that out, please, pretty please, with sugar on top, tell us what you're thinking. As I tell research participants all the time, I don't want you to say nice things. I want you to say honest things. You know, and if those honest things are nice, great. But if those are nice but not honest, then they're completely meaningless. So only say things that you mean on those surveys that you complete for us. It really helps us in gearing up for another year of professional development and supporting teaching and learning at K-State. So that is my beginning. Oh, I have one more announcement. Very excitingly, Global Campus is partnering with a couple people, including TLC, to have another Course Design Institute this summer. So last year, many of you probably were participating in the Course Design Institute that happened then. We're doing one this year. It's going to go for 5 weeks. It's going to go from June 1 to July 2nd. It's going to be pretty much all online. There will be a couple of synchronous meetings, but everything can be done asynchronously if that needs to happen. There are going to be 5 modules. The first module is going to be on the teaching persona, philosophy, and practices. The second module is the fundamentals of online and blended teaching and learning. The third module is on tools for integrating technology into teaching and learning. The fourth module is student success in online and in blended teaching and learning. And the final module is assessment in online and blended teaching and learning. So it's going to be great content. It's going to be great events in there. I'm going to be in there a little bit, so I'm looking forward to it. And I really invite any of you to take part in this. It was out in the K-State today, this morning. And if you know someone who wants to do that, I think it's free too, right, Trina? Trina, free?
Yes, it is free. Limited space maybe, but free.
And I think this is something, you know, this is, if any of you going on the market soon, I'm thinking graduate students, things like that. If you're going on the market soon, saying you did this, you know, it might be that little thing that says, hey, maybe this person really knows how to teach at our university. So definitely check this out. We're highly promoting it, and you'll see us putting this out over our social media in the weeks to come. We've got a bunch of people in there already, but if you're not one of those, you could make that population even cooler by getting into that Course Design Institute this summer. So let us know if you have questions on that, but we're really looking forward to it. So I wanted to open up today by kind of saying, like, how are we doing? What issues, concerns, kind of that end of the semester is tough, right? We're in dead week. Dead week means something, but it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different students. So how are we doing? And you can always unmute and say it out loud, or you can put it in the chat.
I'm finding difficulty in motivating myself to grade final things that need to be graded. I find that, like, I've been able to, like, get up my energy for, like, you know, okay, last week of teaching, like, you know, putting my effort there and, like, doing that last, like, yay, we finished, we did it. That went great. And now I'm like, I have to gear up to grade all these final projects, and I really don't want to, and they're all like, I have to do everything on the computer. Normally I have students like hand in physical papers that I can just like write on, and having everything on Canvas is just like I just don't have the motivation to do it. So I'm wondering, looking for advice, tips, any commiseration on like, how do you get your motivation on?
So I'm gonna say what I'm doing, and then I definitely want to hear clips on this. Is one of the things that I always try to do, and I've given this advice before, but I think this semester finally got it. Everything coming in this week, I want to grade. All the assignments at the end are things that I've really been looking forward to. Like, I'm actually going in and checking them out before the due date because I'm really excited to see what they're doing. Some of those assignments that are maybe less exciting for me to grade, they're all exciting, right? But some of those are less exciting. We already did those. So I've really kind of backloaded my semester in terms of content and assignments that are ending in highlights for me. And that's something, it's not going to help you right this second, right? But it's definitely helping me in having created a semester that at the end, what I'm getting now, like in my advanced social class, I'm getting homework for life, public service announcements, where they're basically making a message to the world about why the information in this class makes the world a better place. Those are so amazing to read. I'm getting course reflection where people listen to the top 10 things they learned in the class, the things they would recommend to next year's students, and in a 6-word essay, the number one takeaway from the class. These are really gratifying and awesome. So it's the reports and things like that that they did earlier, I'm done with those. So in that last week, I'm really excited when the due dates are rolling around. So that's something that I'm kind of doing now because I suffer from and don't have a great answer to the question of where do I find energy when I don't have any left? Because I'm running low at this time too. So I want to hear some other people kind of answer Andy's actual question about where do we get this motivation to kind of finish up our grading and finish out our courses.
I do the same thing someone suggested in the chat, that I'll grade 5, and then I'll do something that I really find interesting. Then I'll go back and grade another 5, So I have to break it up that way. Sometimes I just can't go straight through and do them. Though I also did what Dawn did and put my big project due a couple of weeks ago. So I didn't have to try to do it now.
And Andy, in the chat, lots of people are commiserating with you.
Yes, commiseration. Yes, very much.
So not a unique phenomenon at all, apparently.
Andy, from a technology point of view, and this may not be something that you can line up for this semester, but to your point about grading papers digitally, if you can get an iPad or even just borrow one with a pencil in Canvas, you can literally be marking up and writing and doing all of that, and then just swipe to the next one and do it. So you kind of get that same feel for the paper if you can beg, borrow, or steal some of the technology to do it.
So Andy, I really struggle with this too, and I usually fail pretty big, but I did have a better success towards the end of last semester. I tried something new, and I printed off a blank schedule for myself with blocks. I just made one on Excel, and it had, instead of being like every 30 minutes, it was like morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, evening. And then I wrote down how many papers I would grade in that block. And I kept it like 2 or 3, so that during a day, I would grade 2 in the morning, 2 in the early afternoon, 3 in the evening. And I found myself trying to get ahead or do it at the beginning of the block so that I'd say, oh, I got my 2 done. Now I can do something else. And it took away the guilt of, oh, I have to grade 8 papers or 10 papers today. It was, I got my morning ones done, and sometimes I got ahead because I think, well, I can do a third one. Now that I've done 2, I can do a third one. And then when evening rolls around, I'm like, I got my 10 done early. That's the only time I've ever gotten ahead, is to break it down into those chunks of time. And then the times that I really, after 2, I was like, I'm done. Then I didn't feel guilty about it. So I was like, the next time I have to grade is 2 o'clock. Or between 2 and 4, and so I can do, other things, and that helped.
I love that idea.
I'll say that a lot of us, myself included, we love crossing things off to-do lists. I have occasionally printed out the class list so I can cross every student off by hand, and that's a reinforcing thing for me that helps me get through sometimes too.
Yeah, I'm really old school with like pen and like I really like pen and paper. And so like, dude, that's been one of the biggest challenges for me this semester is like also like just, you know, in like I'll write little notes to students when I grade their papers, like write something at the top, and it just doesn't like, you know, I still do that digitally, but it just doesn't quite have the same feeling. There's like a lack of like intimacy there that I just like I'm missing. So having like pen and paper to like write down what I'm thinking, I think is very helpful.
I put a quick plug-in for a speed grader. If you use it or don't use it, you might have different feelings about it. But also, instead of just feeling like everything has to be text, if that kind of wears you down and you want something new, then think about like giving audio or video feedback to your students, and it might just kind of liven things up a little bit.
Actually,
That's a
I
good
like
idea.
speed grader, and by the way, my speed grader, I am much less professional in my comments than I am sometimes. Otherwise, it feels different, like almost like a chat. So I will put, you know, WTF, LOL, those kind of things sometimes in the speed grader when I wouldn't necessarily, you know, put that somewhere else. So I think it's a way to kind of humanize. I haven't played with the video and audio functions, Trina. I really like that as an idea too. And that creates better connection. I think I'm suffering from lack of connection with my students more so this semester than I have in the past. One thing I want to kind of say too, and I've made this plug before, so I apologize for, I don't know who remembers stuff that I've said, right? Is if you make those assignments as short as they can be, it reduces the amount we have to grade. So I'm a huge fan of maximums on assignments, not minimums. So a maximum of 1 page, you know, a maximum of 200 words, a maximum of 6 words. I love 6-word essays to kind of really get at the essence of what they could do to demonstrate their learning, because everything we assign comes back. Make sure it's going to come back in a format that you're either looking forward to or can manage. Because I think sometimes we say, you know what, that paper didn't need to be 25 pages. And it probably didn't. You know, I can't think of any paper outside of a thesis or dissertation or a manuscript that needs to be 25 pages right now. You know, you probably get where you need to be in 3 to 5. And that's going to make it a lot easier for us to do that. It's also going to make it more likely we're going to get the student's second draft and not their first. So this is something that I really kind of think about is, you know, how much space or time do I think they need for this? And then I give them a little bit less. So I'm getting in that revised version. And I find the quality of the stuff tends to go up as a result. So lots of wins for that. You've probably heard me make that recommendation before if you've been to a lot of our events, but here we go.
I think also that reflects more the real world than like those 25-page papers. Like, so even in academia, like, so it's so much more common for me to have to write like an abstract or like, you know, a short report on something that I did rather than like this long, lengthy, like, yes, I write articles too, but like having to pitch my ideas in a short amount of space, I think is much harder than having to, you know, getting time to like flesh out all my ideas in an article. And so I think that like saying like, okay, I want you to talk about your whole project, like what you did this semester, and do it in 3 pages. Like suddenly they're like, oh, like I can't explain in great detail, like all that I did to like figure this out. And like, I just have to give you like, this is what I learned. This is what's important here.
Absolutely.
Oh, I did have one student. I had students turning in data and then they had to discuss the data. And I didn't give them a minimum amount to turn in. And I had one student who turned in like 4 sentences.
Yeah, I think,
you know, I tell them if they can do it in 4 sentences,
yeah,
if they can do it in 4
couldn't.
sentences, all about it. I tell them most of the time they're probably not going to get all the information that I'm asking for in 4 sentences, but if they can, I will be so happy.
You know, on the plus side, you cross that student's name off the list real quick.
That's true. That was a fast one.
I haven't done this myself, but I've heard of other people giving assignments, kind of like John's 6-word essay, having students write like a tweet length response or a social media length. Like if you have to click see more or see the rest of the post or whatever, it's too long, and because people will scroll past it kind of thing. And I think that's meaningful. I was also thinking too, like Dawn's suggestion of saving the best for last kind of thing. If you haven't structured your class that way this semester, then that's for the future. But for right now, what I do is at this point, you know your students pretty well, and you probably have an idea which students' papers are going to be easier to grade and which are going to be more time consuming to grade. So saving the ones that you think the student's probably going to do well and I'm going to enjoy reading the paper, save those for last and do the harder ones first, either earlier in the day or earlier in the process. And then you're kind of rewarding yourself with the specific papers you're looking forward to. And, you know, sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes students do better or worse than you expect, but I've found that to be helpful. Or take a quick glance through and say, oh, this one looks interesting, I'm going to save it.
And also say, even though everybody is worn out, this is a great time to think about next semester. And like Dawn said, if you want to front load or whatever, you're going to forget half of where you're at right now. And so if you can journal a little bit, or like, again, if you're tired of writing and you could do no more writing, then just turn your tape recorder thing on your phone and just make remarks to yourself, maybe as you're walking or driving or whatever you're doing, say, well, this is an improvement I can make for next year, and just keep a kind of a running recording of something like that.
So one of the things that I love to do is trying to mention thinking about next semester. I'm thinking about this semester. I'm not out of this semester yet, but I'm doing that in a reflective way. And at the end of the semester, I love to look back at what I've learned this semester, the moments that I've had. Tucker will drop in the chat a video that I made at the end of last semester. It was the top things that I learned that semester. And what was meaningful for me is not only to sit back and reflect on the top things that I learned, but I then shared that with my students in class. I made a video of it and I shared it with them. Tomorrow, we're going to put out a video. It's like my top 10 favorite things from teaching this semester. And again, we're going to put that out. You'll be able to see it on our Engage the Stage channel. We're also going to give it to my students. So, because I think it's these moments that we have, right? Because just Trina's right, we're going to forget them. But right now, I'm very aware of that funny thing that happened in the second week that I wanted to remind my students, hey, I remember we had that moment together. Remember we had that connection. And, you know, if you're in one of my classes this semester, you might hear your name in this video tomorrow. I only used a couple last names. If I was, you know, really comfortable, you okay with what I'm going to say? Otherwise, I might have just used the student's first name. But these personal touches, they make that semester kind of meaningful. And then when I watched the one from last year, I had all of this kind of positive flood of emotion and fulfillment from what my fall semester had for me. So I have these video records of the meaning that I had for semester to semester. So I highly recommend kind of doing these now when we can kind of appreciate and remember all the cool things that happened. And I think it's cool for students to kind of say, yeah, I remember that. That was cool. So it provides some meaning and some value. The last thing I want to have my students do is to say, I'm glad I'm done with that course, right? That kind of knee-jerk reaction. Now I'm going to forget everything I learned. I'm going to move on to the next thing. I want them to say, hey, we got something out of that course. And even if they don't remember all those specific things, they can at least remember that, you know, the emotion at the end was positive. So these are things that I kind of recommend that you even do now. And like I said, share with your students if you're comfortable. It's a really great way to connect. And I'm seeing some things pop up in the chat, so I'm trying to catch up. Yes, Trina's point about making changes on your syllabus is so important. I have my syllabus from this semester right here, and I'm kind of making changes, like that topic needed a little more time, that assignment needed to be a little earlier, those kind of things, because I'm going to forget when spring rolls around next year that I wanted to make those changes. And Clarissa made the same point. I like that idea of picturing the student's face as they're reading the comments you make on their work. That makes it a lot easier to remember that they are a person. I think sometimes when we make a comment and say, you know, this isn't a comment to make, but if like, oh, this is horrible writing, for instance, if the student is reading that, you know, think about how they would feel. You know, I remember, and I've told this story before, I apologize if you heard me tell the story before, but when I was in graduate school, at the end of my first semester, my big stats paper, I got my big stats paper, I got it in, it was handed in as a hard copy, came back with a hard copy with comments on it. And the instructor wrote very good paper and crossed out the very. You know, it's just kind of one of those things like, you know, what happened? And it took me like a couple of years to approach that professor and be like, what happened? He's like, well, I thought it was a very good paper till I read your colleague's work. You know, kind of thing. It was like, That's not making me feel better. Thank you. But it's just, kind of understanding that someone is going to read that, and what can we think, to kind of massage it. Because our job is not to put our students down, is to teach them. So, that empathetic element is something I think is really important. So I think it was Melissa who made the comment, maybe it was someone else. But I love that idea of thinking about how they're going to look when they grade it, when they read what we did when we graded it.
That's one mindset that I've shifted in myself. A couple of years ago, I started, instead of like focusing on like what they did wrong, like I started shifting the mindset of like what they did well and what they can improve on. And that small shift in mindset, I find really affects the way that I give comments, because it's not, this is bad writing. It's, here's what you can do to improve your writing. So, I noticed that, some of your sentences are disconnected. So you can improve that by putting in connectors, or, like whatever the thing may be. And so thinking about like what your student is doing well and what they can improve on is different than what they do well and what they do poorly.
I really like that, Andy, and that's something I don't always succeed in that, but I try to do that. And one thing that can be harder depending on the student's paper than others is to look for what they have done well and then tell them you want to see more of that. So maybe a student has really good support for a point in one paragraph of the entire paper and the rest of it's lacking. So instead of pointing out, man, you're really lacking support everywhere else, writing a note on that paragraph and saying, you have really great support. I would like to see more of this throughout your paper. That they already have something they can point to and say, oh, I succeeded right there. I just need to repeat that success somewhere else. And that seems to be good. And I try to think of grading papers as honestly some of the most important teaching I do, because it's so individualized and students come with such different sets of knowledge and skills that when you give feedback on their individual work, that is the best opportunity you have to teach that student what they need to know. And so, but like grading is still my least favorite thing. That makes it sound like, but it's, I don't think most people love grading, but when I try to think of it as teaching an individual instead of as grading and reframe it that way, sometimes that can help with my motivation.
Something that's helped me there too, because I also hate grading, because I think grading is the necessary evil that goes along with teaching, right? And I've really tried to change the way that I think about what my students produce. I used to think of it as assessments, and we still use that term. You'll hear me use that term. But in reality, what I think about is I give them the opportunities to demonstrate learning. And that changes the way that I think about it. Andy talked about mindset. When I'm thinking about this is their students' attempt to demonstrate their learning, it makes it a lot easier for me to interact with it in a positive way. Yeah, I teach for free, but they have to pay me to grade. Tiffany, that is amazing. And one thing that I'll put, I feel that the need to kind of offer this even as a caution, and I feel bad even doing that, but we do have to be careful in that when we're providing feedback to our students, if they don't understand why they didn't earn all the points, if we are too supportive in our comments, that may come back in terms of a confrontation of you on your grading that you've kind of given to the students. So when we're being supportive and constructive, I do think it is important that it is clear to the students that they did not do everything that they're supposed to do to the levels that allow them to earn a higher grade than what they wanted. Because what the student will do is say, you didn't say anything bad about anything. How did I get a low grade? And unfortunately, that's what students are sometimes looking for. So I think some clarity in there is going to be important. And I hate to say that because it kind of antithetical to the better conversation we're having about demonstration of student learning. But I think it is a reality of our end of the semester.
I also think it's good to remember from the student point of view, a lot of times what they're turning in, you're the only audience for that. So unless you're doing peer review or some kind of sharing, you are the only audience and they've put a lot of time in. So if they don't get any type of feedback, it's really difficult. So
yeah. So a pretty interesting question just emerged in the chat. And the question is, are there any tips for interacting with a student who is a facile, perhaps pathological liar? Guidance for what to do in terms of closing out the semester and in terms of their continuation in our college / their program. And then there's a follow-up question about kind of details about what a facile liar is and to contrast that with pathological. So I am kind of interested into a little bit more detail about what the question is actually asking. and then kind of dealing with these instances of a dishonest student, or a student who exhibits dishonesty generally, whether or not the student themselves is attributionally dishonest. So what are our thoughts dealing with dishonest students?
Let me
Sure.
clarify too, like
Yeah.
I'm not a licensed counselor, so I didn't feel okay pulling out like some sort of diagnosis of pathological lying. But this student lies all the time, readily, about things that don't need to be lied about. But lately, as we've come to the end of the semester, it's turned into, there's a lot of manipulation happening, and and I'm working with, our student services director on this, but, just as an instructor, having to manage the whole, I'm more of the face of the academic side of the program, and thinking about my colleagues who might have this student in the future.
Sure. So I'll start by saying I have not given any thought to this question. This is something I thankfully haven't had to deal with much in my career. So I'm going to sit back and let some other people talk for a bit.
I think for me, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think for me, it kind of depends on the nature of the lies. Like, many students have lied and told me that their grandma has died 3 times, and in the COVID times, I kind of just let that occur, because I'm like, even if you don't have that particular excuse, it's the COVID times, I'm just gonna let you have it. But if it's something like they are saying that they wrote a paper they didn't write, that's plagiarism, that's different. And that deserves a lot of, I don't want to call it retribution, but in my head, I think of it as retribution. So I'm going to say that word.
Yeah, I think like it's a challenging thing. And I think, like Tiffany said, it kind of depends on what the lying is related to. I am much more inclined, not even in COVID times, just in general, like, it's not, I don't feel it's my job to police my students and verify, like, are they telling me the truth? Are they not? My job, from my perspective, is to offer educational opportunities. And if the students want to take them, great. They're here, they're paying, they're adults. Like, I'm offering education. They get out of it what they put in. If they don't want to put the effort in, or their priorities are somewhere else, like, that's on them, like, they get out of it what they get out of it. And so there's a certain amount that I just go like, all right, you do you. If the lying is on something that is, like Tiffany said, like plagiarizing, or saying that they turned something in when there's no evidence that they did, you have to kind of weigh that and say, like, okay, well, I understand that you're saying that this is something that you did, or whatever, but I don't have that here. I don't have that evidence. And honestly, just sometimes saying, like, I've noticed a pattern of you having a lot of technological issues. I had a student this semester that always with technological issues, always, to the point where it's like, if you're having this many technological issues, you need to figure out a new system, or, and so I don't need to say, like, I think you're lying, but say, like, this is something that you need to figure out. I've noticed that this is a pattern, and this is something that's problematic. And, if you continue behaving like this in the future, like, that's going to cause you, it's going to cost you opportunities. It's going to cost you job opportunities. It's going to cost you relationships. So, be aware. So kind of doing it as like, you're helping them by letting them know that this behavior is problematic.
There's also one nice thing about doing things online that I found is that students who claim that, oh, I just noticed I missed all these, I don't have grades for all these homeworks, and I submitted them and I don't know what happened to them. I believe, sorry, sonic grenade. I believe that ITAC can actually check on those things, and can go through and look at their logs and see whether a student attempted to submit something that didn't go through. And then you can judge it based on that. Like say, contact ITAC, tell them what you missed, tell them the dates it was due, and see if they can find any evidence. Otherwise, it's too late in the semester and there's nothing I can do about it now.
So
And
the question
those of
that I
you
had,
that know more about ITAC can maybe clarify on that.
so the question I had, Leslie, and Melissa asked this question too in the chat, is basically how is the lying affecting you and your colleagues? So how is it coming out? How is it manifesting? Like in what domains? Like what are the effects of the lying?
Well, in the near term, it takes up a lot of energetic bandwidth dealing with all the stories and the drama. Recently, it has, turned into needing extensions or special accommodations that don't fall under like an accommodations letter. That would be unfair to the colleagues. There was something submitted as evidence of process work that was another student's work. So there's some integrity issues at play. That's really the big thing is, and yeah, I mean, I've probably spent more energy on this student and now coming to the end of the semester and the kaleidoscope all of a sudden fitting into a pattern and seeing like, oh my gosh, all of this energy has been taken up with lies. I'm just exhausted and done and, thinking of my colleagues who will get her next year. Oh yeah, I imagine there will be some conversation with Camilla. Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to start having some of these conversations, because it's one thing to have a student telling you stories where like that probably didn't happen. It's another thing when it's affecting academic work. And I think Camilla can provide a lot of direction on that. And she's had training and experience that I can't even approximate. So I would say that she's probably the person to think about in doing this. I think it's interesting, and I'm going to kind of generalize this a little bit more, is we all have students who take a little bit more of our emotional energy than we might like, whether it's an extreme situation kind of like you're talking about, or just a student who dominates conversation with their personal experiences in a way that goes beyond what you want to happen in your class. And I think there's a balance, because I think sometimes at the end of the semester we think, oh my God, I survived it through with that student, versus, all the positive experience that you had with all the other students maybe in that same class. And I really try to focus now on the wins, not the losses, in the semester that we just had. I mean, he doesn't know that I'm looking at Noah. Noah and I had a student this semester that took a lot more of our emotional energy than any other student in that class, probably all the other students combined, didn't take as much of our emotional energy. And what was so hard about that is that the statement seemed to be that we were always doing it suboptimally. Whatever we were doing wasn't enough for what the student wanted or needed. And we had contact with the Student Access Center, as I'm sure many of us would do in a situation like this, to ask for guidance, or like, no, this isn't you, what the student is doing is yada, yada. But it did make us feel better. It did make us feel better for Student Access to say, no, you're doing the right things, because the student kept telling us we weren't. And it was a moving target. The narrative kept shifting. I'm not going to say the student was lying, but I think the student was experiencing a lot, and it was coming out in our class. And what I think we tried to do is empathy has been my mantra this semester, is saying, if the student is doing this in here, stuff in that student's life might not be going very well. Let's try to be a bright spot. And we bent over backwards in ways that we never had before to try to be a bright spot for that student. And I think we eventually were. So I'm gonna celebrate the work that we did, rather than kind of say, oh my God, I'm glad we're done with that. But it is so emotionally effortful to deal with these kind of situations. And I'm not sure how they're preventable. One of the things that I always try to think about as educators, what could I do differently to prevent that from happening? I wouldn't do anything differently. There's nothing I would have done differently or would do differently to prevent that from happening. It just happened. And I think that's a reality that sometimes I have to force myself to accept.
Leslie, I know that these type of incidents can take just a lot of you can talk how draining they can be. If you're trying to find just an additional resource to kind of help tackle this, you do have an opportunity to potentially give this student one of the most important teaching lessons of their life. But it's going to take more effort to get you there. And maybe it's taking where there's been blatant integrity issues and taking those to a head and taking those up to the integrity office, not to punish the student, but to say, I want to draw this to the point where I can have the conversation with them that they realize how this is going to lose them opportunities in their life. And maybe I can get them to that point and have this be a life-changing experience. And you may not be able to make it to the top of that mountain, but that may give you the energy to be like, that's what I'm going to try to do with this. I'm going to try to push it to the head, to have that meaningful conversation with the student that's outside of the bounds of what this class is even about, but a life lesson that will impact them. And then if you can be successful at that, then that's going to impact their journey through the rest of your colleagues in their classes. But you have to have the courage to do it.
I love what you just said on that, Brandon, especially because I think it's so important. And one thing that I've been trying to keep in my mind more recently is that like learning takes time, and what we do in our classes a lot of times doesn't produce results within that semester's time. It may not even produce results during the student's college experience. It might be years down the road that the student goes, oh, that's what my professor was saying. Oh, and it might just be planting a seed that they never even recognized that it's, that we had any impact, but just planting seeds that one day down the line will hopefully sprout and grow. But that we might not ever see that. And that can be one of the kind of sad and challenging things of our job. But also I feel like it gives me a certain amount of hope that like, even if I'm not seeing results now, to know that like they might come.
But how do you balance putting that much energy into one student and as opposed to the 40 other students you have in the class?
Are you literally asking, or is that rhetorical?
No, I'm asked. Well, could be a little of both.
Could you use it as a lesson for the rest of the class and comment on how, if there's something like an integrity issue, when someone asks for a recommendation, you can say, look, I'm not comfortable giving you one. And you could even couch it as a story. A student I've had recently asked me for a recommendation. I wasn't comfortable giving it to them because they've demonstrated a pattern of shaky integrity, or however you want to interpret it. You're sending a message to that particular student that there are consequences for their actions. And now you're also helping other students, and they get something from the malfeasance of the other ones, or the ones that you don't like. So you could make something good from this, and you can reinforce good behavior in the students who are doing everything right. And it might also help you too, like, haha, I see what you're doing, and now I've said something publicly about it. Not to you, not with attribution, but if it weighs heavily on your conscience, then you know who you are.
I think I would be careful about that, though. I think kind of calling a student out publicly, because the student's going to know that you're talking about them. And I realize you didn't use the student's name, but I could see that potentially instigating further confrontation, and I would just be careful about doing that. I think doing that privately with the student is a great idea. I think using it in future semesters and kind of saying, hey, just some guidelines and tips and things like that based on experience I've had with students is something I'd be more comfortable with. But I would just be afraid of that catalyzing that interaction into something much more negative in a public domain. And I think fighting with a student publicly is for me emotionally, I'm not going to be able to teach after that. So I'm just kind of trying to think about, what I would be able to do. We're all different. We're all comfortable with different things. I myself probably wouldn't do that.
I think my question was more about how you justify spending that much time yourself on other students instead of spending it on students who are doing, what they're supposed to be doing, and how if you spend so much time dealing with one student who's such a problem, you don't care anymore what anybody else is doing, right? You're just done with all of them. So how do you kind of balance that so you don't get so fed up with one student that you start just letting it all go?
I think we're all in kind of a weird situation right now. We've extended our generosity beyond what is normal this year because illness and COVID and all of this other things have happened, extenuating circumstances. yeah, and maybe that's kind of like why we're all a little bit tired, is we've all had to just extend. In a normal year, this would have been cut off a while ago because, all of this stuff wouldn't have been tolerable. But, rhetorically, how do we set a boundary so that we can reserve stuff for people who don't have all the extra?
One of the things that I try to do is if I have a negative contact, I try to reestablish a positive contact as quickly as I can. And one of the things that I'll try to do is if a student is exhausting me in my class, and if I can't establish positive contact with that student, I'll try to establish positive contact with other students in the same class. And it's just something that I kind of do to create connection for me, to recreate relationships, to provide some fulfillment, to let me know I'm doing something relevant and valuable for my students generally. So I'll sometimes, and I don't think it's quite a balancing act. I don't think like all the negative experiences is counterweighted by the positive experience, but it's something I would rather focus on. So in some ways, the negative contact with a student, the negative experience with a student actually inspires me to try to have more contact with the others, to kind of restore some of that fulfillment for myself. Now, as Eva's pointed out, though, is time is an inexhaustible resource. We don't have unlimited amounts of it. Energy is an exhaustible resource. We don't have unlimited amounts of it. And what I just hope is that whatever I'm dealing with is going to be within the realm that I can deal with, because I don't have the ability to decide that I'm going to have students take less of my time in a given semester, that I'm going to have less of their lives impact them as it impacts my class in a given semester. I don't have control over that. So I try to just kind of assume that I'm going to be able to get through this. And I work with people like Tucker Jones and Noah Rankin, and last semester, Ashley Schiffer, wonderful teaching assistants who help me navigate these. I have wonderful colleagues like all of you that I can bounce ideas off for all of these. So I really try to engage my actual support and my social support to help me through this, because if I'm struggling with it, I'm going to say that the struggle is probably valid. I've been doing this a long time. The things that I'm dealing with right now are exceptional. The things that you're dealing with right now are exceptional. And I think it's okay to reach out to someone and say, this sucks, what can I do? Sometimes the answer is you can't do much, but yes, it sucks. And that's, I think, just some of our reality. So if it's hitting you hard, that happened. And it wasn't something necessarily preventable. And I don't even necessarily have any advice for how you can do it differently. But I'm going to say, yeah, it sucked, and I'm sorry.
I want to
Yeah,
chime in with Dawn and just say that for, instructors and whatever your position is to build your toolbox, like we tell for the students, and know that when something seems like it's going to occur that may be a little bit out of your energy or your knowledge or your access to, is to reach out early to someone that you think will be able to come and help the situation or provide the additional resource for you or that student or that colleague. And so that, because it's going to happen again, maybe a different way, maybe a different semester, just something else. But when you have those experiences, because they just kind of happen, these students kind of just appear, or the situations in their lives or a colleague lives or your lives just kind of happen. So when they do happen, or you feel like it's about to happen, or you see some of the same signs, is to reach out to those resources that you've built or that you can kind of research and find for yourself or the student, and just say, you spoke about this, and this made me think of this place here or this person here that maybe can give you some more guidance or help support you in this way. And you don't have to like call it out, or you don't have to, any of those things that just put you in the box yourself. It's just reaching out to the resources for you and that other person that you want to help, as well as help yourself in the situation, in the role that you played in the situation. You don't have to fix it all or be, the person, but just your role. And then you'll feel a little bit more satisfied in how you showed up. And then you may provide guidance for how that person can, be as, a future student.
So one of the things I often do as a coping mechanism is I try to introduce levity. It helps me. Sometimes it helps my students. So my natural inclination is to tell you a story I found funny at this point that relates. Um, One of my students hadn't been coming to class recently, so I kind of reached out to some people that work with her, and I said, is what's going on with the student? Haven't seen her, and I said, oh well, she has snakes, and I said, yeah. I said, well, she lost her snake, and I'm like, oh, sorry, was it sick? It's like, no, lost it. It's in the house, and she can't find it, and that just kind of blew me away. Just kind of was like there are so many things our students are dealing with that you could, but the nope rope is loose. Yes. There's so many things out there happening. Like I can't imagine eating or sleeping in a house where there's a snake in it and I don't know where like a big one. So it's just, there are so many things out there that we can't predict. And Mitzi's absolutely right. Sometimes they just drop into our lives. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to be a bright spot when they leave. When we part ways, I'm going to try to be a bright spot. But yeah, if that student asks for extension because the snake is loose in the house, yep, you get that extension. Yes, literal snakes, real snakes. Like have Zoom meetings and they'd be like on her. And they were like, reptiles and amphibians, it doesn't work for me. My kids are like, pick up that frog. I'm like, no, I don't pick up frogs. That's not something I do. Yeah. So I want to turn this to something a little bit more optimistic. I want to think about lessons learned and recharging. These are some of the things that I want to think about it as we kind of go. So Trina kind of mentioned this earlier. What is the lesson we're going to take for next semester, for the next time we teach? So I want to kind of start there. And I would love people to kind of just, what have you learned from this semester so that even if this thing was a dumpster fire that was really, really hard and we had all the stuff, what are you going to take away to make next time better? And then I want to hear, what are you going to do to just recharge yourself? What do you do to work on yourself? So we'll do that one second. But what are we taking away? What are we learning?
I'm going to echo what Stuart said in chat of just kind of deadlines and being flexible there. And on top of that, also learning that when given the chance, like I've got a couple sections right now, like 48 students, well, 24 students, that students can choose whether they want to be in class or they want to be on Zoom, and they are still choosing to be on Zoom. So there's something about Zoom that they prefer as part of their learning experience. And I've still got to figure out why that is. And I think Don's already said he's planning on teaching high flex next semester. I'm strongly leaning towards doing the same for that reason. And I'm not quite sure why, except students seem to prefer it. So I'm just kind of curious if anyone else is kind of feeling the same way.
Excellent, Brendan. Thank you. What do we think?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about just attendance in general and how I want to approach it moving forward. Like more and more, I just feel like having a strict attendance policy is not helpful. And like, thinking about how I can create my classes in a way that it's really beneficial for students to be in class, and that students come because they want to be there, not because, if you don't come, then there's going to be consequences. Like, I don't want that to be like the atmosphere of my class. And so trying to figure out like how I can be flexible. I hate high flex. I loathe it. I am so ready for this to be over, and I never want to have to use Zoom again with my students. That being said, I am with you, Brandon, that there's this like, I do want, if students want to come to class and have some kind of issue, like I would like to be flexible. I still really don't want to use Zoom. So I don't know. I've been having this like internal monologue recently of like, how am I going to approach attendance moving forward? I haven't figured it out yet, but I am thinking about like, how am I going to be more open, flexible? So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts.
So in the chat, people are talking about empathy and compassion and flexibility. And I think this is sort of those of us who want to continue to teach high flex. I think that's what we're thinking is we're trying to make it easier for students, right? So people have said, that being Zoom, it's less pressure. You don't have to worry about childcare as much. Although any of us who have kids running around while we're Zooming, we understand it's not a perfect solution either, right? But you can wear sweatpants. I'm wearing sweatpants right now, right? I mean, these are the kind of things that happen. So there's some facility to education, and I think one of the things about high flex for me is it is harder, but I'm balancing that against accessibility for my students. And what I'm choosing to do is to use high flex in particular for my larger classes, because I find myself, and this is where that compassion for myself is coming in, is I don't do as well if there's no one in the room with me. If I'm teaching high flex and there's no one there with me, I have a hard time with that. But if I get at least 5, we're good. If I can have 5 people in class, there's enough variety of interaction that I can have with those 5 students that I can provide a great experience for them and a great experience for people at home. Less than that, it's a lot harder for me to do that. So this is something that I'm trying to do and I've learned a lot. I'm trying not to lose that learning, right? I've learned a lot to do this. I've never had a Zoom meeting really prior to the pandemic. And now I teach high flex in all my classes. So it's one of those things where I'm trying not to lose that learning, and I'm trying to meet students where they are, because I don't think, well, I'll say this, I think we should remove as many barriers to education as we can. And being in a physical classroom might be a barrier we can remove. I love that I've had students in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia at my classes this year, right? We weren't limited to the people who could be in Manhattan, Kansas. At least my classes weren't limited the way they had been previously. I think that's awesome. And that's something I will take forward like Brandon is. And I will admit with Andy, I hate Zoom too. But it's a tool, and I might use it because it's a good tool for the purpose I need to use it for. I'm trying to keep up with the chat too. What are other people learning or taking with them that they've learned? So I'm seeing Stu is using the chat even in face-to-face classes from Zoom. Wonderful way to connect. The breakout rooms are awesome. I really like the breakout rooms in Zoom. Yeah, and for a lot of us, as a couple of you are mentioning, it's not that people like Zoom. Zoom is a necessary resource for the situations we're dealing with. And I think that's an important concession to sometimes make. So any other lesson? These are great lessons. I love the compassion. I love the relaxing. I love the oh, and this is something I was going to say too, Andy. The attendance requirements a lot of us have that have been relaxed. None of my classes have requirements, and Tucker's going to drop the choice to learn link in the video chat. All of my classes are based on opportunities, not requirements. So what I do is I reinforce behavior. I don't penalize behavior. So if you come to class, you might get points. I won't take away points because you didn't have those points to begin with. And I think it's more than a semantic difference. I think if I said, hey, I would love to see you in class because you can have opportunity to earn points when you're there, is different than saying go to class or you lose points. And what it does is kind of a gaining rather than a losing orientation. And I found this really works to help students' intrinsic motivation. They're making choices for themselves. They're not doing something I told them to do. So this is something that I really like using in my classes, and I get around any of those requirements. And then I only give them opportunities for points that are things that are important. So if, just coming to class and sitting there is not important, well, then that's not how you're going to get points in my class. If it is, that might be how you do get points in your class. So streamlining, I think, is important there too. So other things that people have learned before we transition to the how we're going to recharge. All right, so what are we going to do to recharge and recover and re-energize?
Not work anymore.
Not work anymore. I like that. One of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to do different work. Unfortunately, time is a zero-sum game, and some of the stuff I really want to do this semester I didn't get to do. So I'm going to not work, but then when I work, I'm going to work on the stuff I want to work on. And I think that's awesome. Tiffany's going to drink a lot of tea and read a book for fun. That's amazing.
I've actually discovered that now that I'm not working evenings and weekends anymore, I'm having trouble working during the regular week too.
Right. Andy's going to take a vacation. My family, the kids don't know this, so if you see my kids, don't tell them. We're gonna like road trip back to the East Coast to visit family we haven't seen in quite a while. And the reason we're road tripping is so we can leave when we want. We don't have to wait for the flight, because sometimes my families, they just fill us up. Everybody froze for a second. Oh no.
I think just you froze, boss. I'm sorry. Oh, he's gone. Ooh.
He's done. He's just going to start packing for the trip right now.
He's like, you know what? Now's a good time.
This actually happened to me in one of my class meetings. None of the students were answering questions, so I pulled out my 20-sided die and was going to roll it and pick, count across and pick one. And I rolled the die and I started counting, and then I realized they were all frozen. So it saved them. By the time I got the connection back, it was okay. And they were like, woo!
Like, well, that explains why none of them are talking.
Yeah. No, it froze just as I rolled the die. That's when it froze. So
I'll share that my daughter and I have been talking about taking a trip where we're just going to throw an air mattress in the back of the truck, and we aren't planning anything. We're just going to take off driving and see what happens. I think that's a sign of how this year has gone. We just kind of want to get completely away. And I think it's the day after her finals when we're taking off.
That
sounds
sounds
amazing.
like Thelma and Louise. I like it.
Hopefully it'll have a better outcome.
Yeah.
Not sure if Don's coming back or not.
Usually when his internet bugs out like that, he has to restart his entire computer. So he might not make it back in time.
Yeah.
Very similar to what Don was saying, something that I'm planning on kind of doing this summer to kind of recharge is defend my dissertation. So I'm going to be spending the next few weeks kind of getting that finished up and hopefully being finally done with the thing. So that'll be a really nice kind of opportunity to focus on that for a few weeks, months.
Leslie, what kind of a garden do you have?
I have a plot in one of the UFM community gardens south of town. It's like 25 by 25, but I always seem to have to neglect it at certain key points in the growing season because of school. And so I have a whole bunch of weeds. Last night I was just out there working it out.
It sounds pretty cathartic to just pull the weeds.
Mhm. Yeah, it is.
So Don just texted me. He said that his internet is not working at all, so he's not going to be able to rejoin us. But out of the sake for time, he wanted me to pass on a message for you all, just saying thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for making our professional development series this year one of the most attended that we've ever had in the history of the Teaching and Learning Center. It's been fantastic to talk with you all each and every week about teaching and the things that we can be doing to really be there and support and empathize with our students. Please keep in mind that all of the requirements for the professional development certificates and the fellowship, those are available on our website, and the deadline is coming up. It's going to be that May 25th, no, 22nd, May 22nd. Is the deadline for that. So please keep that in mind. If you need an extension on that, please reach out to me and we can definitely work with you. And the last thing Don wanted me to say on his behalf was thank you so much for being here, and he hopes all is well.
I want to give a huge thanks to you guys and the TLC and just this whole group, because this year has been horrible, but this group every week has been a nice opportunity to connect and chat about teaching. So big thanks for all the work that you guys have done.
Thank you. And this is actually my last professional development event. So next year, you're going to be getting all of the emails from Ashley and Noah. They're going to be filling in for me. I accepted a faculty position at Washburn University.
Congratulations.
Bravo.
Congratulations, Tucker. Yay.